It's true. I have been a dirt archaeologist most of my life, and it might be said, well, what's a dirt archaeologist dealing with, what's he doing dealing with chiasmus? Well, actually, they're not too that far apart. They both have patterns to search out. They both have difficult words that are really hard to understand, much less say. Basically, the topic today is much cleaner than doing dirt archaeology, and there's a lot less travel involved. Now, the first screen, please. Book of Mormon Archaeology in and about Mesoamerica. This is by the Archaeological Research Institute and Rama. Deciphering the chiasmic formats in Alma 22, 27 to 35 and 23:1. The recent research of Mormon's unique descriptions of Book of Mormon geography, as recorded in Alma chapters 22 and 23, can be considered an addendum to my 1988 publication. Now, had I understood at that time the chiasmic messages that are involved in these verses by Mormon, I would have had more additional information to support the key geographic hypotheses that I started in that publication 25 years ago. And I've continued to promote since during these years. The basic work, the analytical procedures, were generally derived from Wilford Watson's article, Chiastic Patterns in Biblical Hebrew Poetry. And I'd like to thank Jack Welch, who's here with us today, for making this publication available to us so that I have something to go to try to find meaning with what I'm dealing with. This basic chiasm is a brief reintroduction to us to the basic formats that we find in chiasmus. Here we see the parallelisms. We begin with a signal word, and then we have the parallels with ziggurat and pyramids, grass and reed, prairie and marsh. And then this whole theme continues. The winds will smite man's prideful presumptions. The tides will sweep away man's vain expectations. And the final couplets, our Lord will bring down the vain monuments. Surely our God will wash away the prideful manipulations. And this is what we're dealing with as we approach and understand the chiasmus here in Alma 22. Here I've put, and don't try to read this, it's just too much for that screen, and it's not meant for you to read, but I wanted you to compare. On the left, we have the basic text of the Book of Mormon for Alma 22 and 23. And on the right, when I first started looking at this, as many of you have, I spotted some parallels that exist that are of chiastic format. For instance, the king of the Lamanites sending a proclamation among his people, both up here in 27 and down here in chapter 23, verse 1. And then, of course, we have over here the borders of the different lands, and then we have other aspects, which I'll be picking up and choosing later on. But I think many of you have read these verses and these chapters have seen these patterns, and they're very important patterns for understanding this chiasm. This is the basic chiasmic structure of the 10 verses in Alma 22. And you can see the flow. What I've done is I've changed the margins on them so that it'll show the flow, and we're essentially dealing with 5 different stanzas. 5 stanzas in this poem by Mormon. And we're going to go now to the first. What I'll do is, the first stanza is the upper line, where it says, "The king sends a proclamation." And then the lower stanza is the first verse of chapter 23, in which it repeats, "The king sends a proclamation" among the Lamanites. These are the framing this stanza 1 is the frame on both the up and down, upper and lower, of the entire poem. And then we have stanza 2 at the next one, 3, 4, and 5. Each one is separate. Each one is dealing with different types of information that are pertinent to Mormon at that time and are pertinent to us as we try to understand the setting of the Book of Mormon relative to these wonderful chapters in Alma 22. I've done a comparison here so that you can see the English text on the left with some of its patterns shown, and those same patterns shown within the chiasmic structure on the right. And the color codes show essentially that the red codes up at the bottom and at the top are associated with these here in the chiasmic structure. The purple and is stanza 2. Stanza 3 is essentially right in this point. Stanza 4 is the green, showing the green, and stanza 5 is back in this area, and I guess that's sort of a purple, isn't it, again? This is how it breaks out if we want to separate them into the 5 separate stanzas. And then we're going to start with stanza 1. Stanza 1 is, and it came to pass, the king sent a proclamation throughout all the land, amongst all his people, who were in all his land, who were in all the regions round about. And then it's at such an angle that I can't read it very well. But in any case, this is the place here where the first part of stanza 1 breaks off. That's in, I believe, verse 27. And then this is the second part of the stanza, and this is verse 1 of chapter 23. And we'll go to the next one. This is where we put the stanza together in English text, and then I had to use codes. I coded all the key words, all the key associations, so that I could see the patterns within those stanzas and identify what they were, so that some of them are so subtle that you can't see them without actually coding in the key words. Others are very apparent, as you can see. Let's go to the final, in which I've got the color codes now for these various couplets and lines. That's here at the very. I hope you can see this fairly well. Here we have the red. The king sends a proclamation associated with the red here in A1. The king of the Lamanites sent a proclamation. Okay, in B we have. This is in Alma 23:1. It talks about Ammon and Aaron and Omner and Hemni and their brethren. And then in B2 down below that, Amner and Aaron and Omner and Hemni and nor neither of their brethren. So those are parallelisms. Those two are parallel. These two in the red are parallel. The greens, all his people in 1D. And then in all his land, we can see it in 1C, throughout all the land, who were in all his land, who were in all the regions round about, and whatsoever place they should be in any part of the land. So you can see the patterns that emerge when you start putting this together in the chiastic format that Mormon was using. Now, Down here in the very bottom, I've got this bracketed. And it's talking about the Nephite missionaries and the proclamation, and this is the purpose of the proclamation. It was to give them the opportunity and the capacity to go forth preaching the Word of God. That's a very critical factor. That was critical to Mormon, and it's singled out. It's not among any of the other patterns. It's almost what we would call an anacrusis, just as, and it came to pass is added in as a signal, an anacrusis. And down, behold, and now, these are, and thus they, these, and anyway, this is like an anacrusis, which is added in, but it's the whole purpose of the king sending this proclamation forward. Now, let's go to stanza 2. This was bordering on the sea. Now, we're talking about the lands. In this stanza, we're talking about the lands occupied by the Lamanites. And we're saying where they are in association with Zarahemla and with each other. And it begins with which were bordering on the sea on the east and on the west. And then we have which was divided in the land of Zarahemla by a narrow strip of wilderness. Crucial, the narrow strip of wilderness comes out. And once again, we have, here it is, on the borders of the wilderness, a parallelism there. Now let's go to the next set. This is still stanza 2. This is where I show the code associations with the English text. And here we have it redlined so that that stands out a little better for you to see. And here we have it redlined so that you can perhaps see it from farther away, I hope. In any case, in A, bordering on the sea on the east and the west. A2, sea east, sea west, bordering on the seashore. A3, borders of Manti, the river Sidon. Here, not the seashore, it's a water. And he uses water through all of these different chiasmus, whether it's the seashore or the river or just a plain statement concerning this water, and the east and the west. And then we have in B1, B2, and B3 in purple, which divided the land of Zarahemla. Here in B2, north of the Zarahemla, and 3, it brings them back, Lamanites and Nephites divided. So you can see the dividing in the Zarahemla, the north by the land of Zarahemla, and then here Lamanites and Nephites. So essentially, it's talking about the land of Nephi being divided from the land of Zarahemla by this narrow strip of wilderness. It's talking about the narrow strip of wilderness being on the north by the land of Zarahemla in 2, and then it's talking about the Nephites and the Lamanites, them being divided. So you see the commonality of these 3 is in the division between either the lands or the peoples. Now we'll go to stanza 3. Stanza 3 has to do with a description of how the Lamanites were scattered in the wilderness, or scattered in the land of southward, through the edges of the wilderness. And here it is in English text, and then below in the codes. Here we have the colors associated, and in this one, it brings it up to stanza 1 so you can see it perhaps a little better. 1A, A1, A2, and A3 in red, Lamanites lived in the wilderness. They dwelled in tents. They were spread through the wilderness. The commonality there is how they were living and where they lived. Basically, the concept of living and inhabiting. And then in B, we have 5 sets of B. On the west, the land of Nephi. On the west, the land of Zarahemla. On the west, the land of Nephi, in the place of their father's first inheritance, which we know was west of the city of Nephi, on the west seashore where they landed. So once again, even though Mormons, he's put it in different words. He's saying the place of their father's first inheritance, and it's synonymous with being west of the land of Nephi on the West Sea. And then the B5, there were many Lamanites on the east by the seashore. So you can see how he wraps those together. And then in C, we have borders by the seashore and bordering along the seashore, whether the Nephites had driven them. And this is probably another one of these anacrusis concepts in which Mormon adds in text that's not really, it's pertinent to the theme, but it's not part of the parallelisms. And this is very common in biblical chiasmus and other chiasmus, both as a signal that you're getting into a chiasmus, but also within or at the end. Here we have stanza 4. And this is the most complex, and it was the most difficult to try to decipher. But it was also one of the most interesting as we deal with Mormon's basic philosophy and his understanding of how the Nephites and the Lamanites were separated. This is the entire code for it, and here we have, let's go back one. Here we have the breakdown. In the red at the top, we have Nephites were nearly surrounded by the Lamanites. The corresponding is down here. The land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla were nearly surrounded by water. So see the commonality of being nearly surrounded, either by the Nephites by the Lamanites, or the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla by water, which is that same symbol that we were using on the East Sea, West Sea, and also the River Sidon. All three are water, all three fit, and all three are used by Mormon as a symbol pertaining to that. Then in the blue, up here, bordering on the wilderness at the head of the River Sidon. So that theme comes in again at the blue. We have three of these. Here, the land bountiful and the land desolation from the east to the west sea. And then the small neck of land. And so it's all of these are bordering. These are the land bountiful and land desolation. That's the border. The line bountiful, the line between bountiful and desolation is synonymous with border. And then in this one down here, the small neck of land between the land northward and the land southward, it fits in the chiasmic structure as the border. A small neck of land being a border. It's a description of what a border is, like a narrow neck of land, or a border, or a line between the land northward and the land southward. So we have these correlations between bountiful and desolation, a border between bountiful and desolation, the same border between the land northward and the land southward. It's talking about the exact same thing. And up here at the top, the bordering on the wilderness at the head of the River Sidon. Bordering is the key fundamental concept relative to these three parallel lines. And then in D, the greens, let me read that for you. They came to the land which they call bountiful. And then one right under that, it bordered upon the land which they called desolation. See the parallel. And then the next set in green. The land on the northward was called desolation. The land on the southward was called bountiful. So what he's done is he's talking about, he's giving the actual names of the lands desolation and bountiful, but he's reversing it. In the first set up here in the top, it's bountiful comes first and then desolation. In this set down here, it's desolation and then it comes into bountiful. And then each of these barred areas are descriptive information in a chiastic format concerning this land northward, land southward. And I'll read that for you. We're talking about in this one here, and it's coming from the term desolation. It bordered upon the land which they called desolation, is that statement. And then this one states, it being in the so far northward that it came into the land which has been peopled and been destroyed, of whose bones we have spoken. So that's a set talking about something about the land desolation we'll get to in a minute. Then we have the next set, which was discovered by the people of Zarahemla, it being the place of their father's first landing. So we know we're still talking about northward. And they came from there up into the south wilderness. And then this set down here is very interesting. It states we're talking about bountiful now. Those were about desolation up here. This is about bountiful. And this is what Mormon has to say. It being the wilderness, which was filled with all manner of wild animals of every kind. That's the center. And then a part of which had come from the land northward for food. That's the last. Now let's go to the next one, which will explain these three. The people of Jared, in the very first one, on the top one, it's the people of Jared it's talking about, traveling from the Near East into the land northward. It says, it being so far northward that it came into the land which had been peopled and been destroyed, of whose bones we have spoken. And it was very interesting to put this in code systems where we're dealing with bones and destruction. The second one has to do with the people of Zarahemla, or the Mulekites. So this one's the Jaredite people that we call them, and this would be what we call the Mulekites. And this states, and is talking again about desolation, which was discovered by the people of Zarahemla, it being the place of their first landing, and they came from there up into the south wilderness. So those two are about desolation of land northward. And they're talking about transitions. They're talking about people coming and going. Now this next one is about bountiful. It leads off with this statement of bountiful. Land on the south was called bountiful. And now this is what he's describing, what Mormon's telling us about the land bountiful. It being the wilderness, which was filled with all manner of wild animals of every kind, a part of which had come from the land northward for food. And those are the three different strophe or lines associated with this set. And all three sets are dealing with the distinction between bountiful and desolation. And they're all three talking about the transition, either of people or in this case animals, from the land southward, from the land northward into the land southward, or in the land northward. This is stanza 5, and it reads, And it came to pass that the Nephites had inhabited the land northward from the east even unto the west sea. And thus the Nephites in their wisdom, with their guards and their armies, and that's B, had hemmed in the Lamanites on the south sea, that thereby they should have no more possession on the north. D, and then in here, that they may not overrun the land northward. So here's his whole rationale for all of this. This is describing the Nephites controlling access in the land northward, and this is his rationale. And he gives it, and it shows up in the Chiasmus here in E1 and E2, that they may not overrun the land northward. Therefore, the Lamanites could have no possessions. Where? Except in the land of Nephi, or the wilderness round about. And now this, it was wisdom on the Nephites, as the Lamanites were an enemy to them. They would not suffer them afflictions on every hand, and also that they might have a country where they might flee. Well, let's see how this looks. This is how it breaks down into the English format and the codes. And these are the color codes associated with it. And here we have it so that perhaps half of you might be able to read it on these screens. In A1, we have the Nephites that inhabit the land bountiful. in A2 at the bottom, that they might have a country where they may flee. So they're inhabiting this land. It's a country. It's their country. They have it to flee to in case they need to be able to get away from the depredations of the Lamanites. Now in B, we have Nephites in the wisdom. So this is the code. These are the key words on this particular strophe or line, the Nephites in their wisdom. We find this down here, and it's reversed in B2. And now this was wisdom on the Nephites, as the Lamanites were an enemy to them. So you see the reversal. First it's Nephites in their wisdom, and here it's wisdom in the Nephites. And then C, here, which was hemmed in by the Lamanites on the south. And why did they hem the Lamanites on the south? In C2, that they, or the Nephites, would not have to suffer their afflictions on every hand. And then in D, the pink, they should have no more possessions on the north. And it's bracketed by D2, the Lamanites could have no more possessions. So those are very apparent. And those are basically working off of E1 and E2, that they may not overrun the land northward, and only in the land of Nephi and the wilderness round about, that they were hemmed in and they were held into that zone where they couldn't move beyond that. And that's essentially stanza 5. Now Mormon has 10 uses of the term border and its variants among these 10 different verses. And if we put these 10 in order and try to bring them up so that you can see them a little better, this is what we have. He has variations, and I break them into 3 different sets. This is the first set. Mormon's variations on the border theme as exposed in his chiasmic format. Number 1, the border, a termination of the land of Nephi in the extent of the Lamanites' domain in the East Sea and West Seashores. And where does that show up? It shows up in stanza 2, 1, in stanza 3, C1, and in stanza 3, C2, which basically, here's how they read. Which was a border, this is A1, which was bordering even to the sea on the east and on the west. And C1, in the borders by the seashore. And C2, bordering along the seashore. So in this one, he uses border in the determination of the land of Nephi and the extent of the Lamanite domain on the east and west seas. And these are all associated with stanzas 2 and 3. Now the next way in which Mormon uses the border theme is exposed the topographic entity or the mountain chain that separated the land of Nephi, the Lamanite domain, from the land of Zarahemla, which was the Nephite domain. And this is how they read. And they're in stanzas 2 and 4. Stanza 2, 3a, through the borders of Manti by the head of the river Sidon, running from the east towards the west. And then in C1, by the narrow strip of wilderness. C2, the borders of the wilderness. And C3, and 5, E1, bordering on the wilderness at the head of the river Sidon. So all of these are complementary. They're all talking about the same thing. And in all these cases, they're talking about the strip of wilderness that separated the Lamanites from the Nephites, and what was in association with that, and that its association with the river Sidon, which occurs in two of these in stanzas 2 and 4. Now, his last 3 are borders, the political frontier, originally established by Chief Captain Moroni and retained during the AD 17 to 26 war. This is during Laconius's reign. in order to eliminate any threat of Lamanite expansion in the land northward. Now this is how these read, and they're all tied to this line or this border that separated desolation and bountiful. The first one in stanza 4e2, on the line bountiful and the land desolation from the east to the west sea. So here the bountiful line bountiful, line desolation is a border, the border line. In D2, and it, the land of bountiful, bordered upon the land which was they called desolation. So that specifically states bordered between bountiful and desolation. And the third is there being a small neck of land between the land northward and the land southward. Now, for years we've interpreted this to mean an isthmus. We've interpreted this to mean something linking land northward and land southward. In the chiasmic format of Mormon, it's not talking that way. It's talking about the border that separated desolation and bountiful. And that's a very important factor. Here we go back, and as I conclude, the general ideas of Alma 22 and verse 1 and 23 we've thought was all associated with geography. Well, Mormon uses geography, but he's using it to teach us. He's using it to place us in the Nephite perspective of how they're dealing with their enemies. It's all about the division of lands and or people and why. In stanza 1, here at the top and at the bottom, we have Nephite missionaries that have converted a large number of Lamanites. And they convert the king of the land. And then the king is so worried and concerned about those Nephites missionaries going out to proselyte throughout the whole land that what he does is he sends a proclamation telling those people, his people, to leave these guys alone, let them proselyte. And that's essentially, we're talking about the division between the Nephites and the Lamanites, but we're talking about the division between the Lamanites who would have possibly killed the Nephite missionaries and definitely killed a lot of the Lamanite converts, and the Lamanite converts are those that believed in God. So that's stanza 2. Oh, stanza 1. The second stanza, stanza 2, has to do with a description of the Lamanite lands about 100 BC. But Mormon carries it forward because he's using that. And it was divided from the Nephites by the land northward and the land, or the narrow strip of wilderness, excuse me. So here in this one, the theme of this stanza is the Nephites and the Lamanites are divided by a narrow strip of wilderness. And it's important for us, and as we try to understand the geography of the Book of Mormon, I can't put enough stress in it, to understand that there is a narrow strip of wilderness there, because that's left out of a lot of presentations and a lot of understanding. Stanza 3 is a description of the lands where the Lamanites lived. Stanza number 4, this is a description of the bountiful desolation of the land northward and why they relied on the border between the land bountiful and the land desolation. So it's like Mormon's statement concerning these two entities of land and how important they are to the Nephites for protecting themselves from the future. And stanza 4 is a description of the Nephite control of bountiful and why they couldn't allow any Lamanite passage northward. Now, Moroni first instituted that during the 72-65 BC war. It was again used, that same area, I believe, by Laconius in this AD 17 to 26 war. And then, of course, Mormon, prior to the treaty of 350 AD, Mormon uses that same area as a definition between his people that are in the land desolation, the city Tiankum, and the Lamanites that are trying to attack from the south, coming up the coast, through the land of Bountiful. And so essentially, that's what we have, I believe. I believe we have Mormon telling us that he's obviously giving this information, he's writing this during the final period, perhaps as late as when he's gone to Gomorrah. And he's giving us his understanding, his whole cultural history, an understanding of why it's important that the Nephites have this area to the north to protect themselves, that they may have a country in which they may flee. And it's a joy for me, aside from the problems with our equipment, it's a joy for me to be able to provide this information to you and to talk to you this day and have this opportunity to present this. And if anything, as I've worked over the years trying to understand better the Book of Mormon and understand what it's all about, as I've done both the analysis of the geography early on and then this analysis of this particular 10 verses relative to the geography of the Book of Mormon and Mormon's purposes, I've come to realize that there isn't any way that this could have been programmed or written in the 19th century out of somebody's mind. There's just too much information. It's too precious and special for us. The Book of Mormon, to me, is a very powerful ancient document which was provided to us through the great, great blessing of having the prophet Joseph. And I am grateful for the opportunity to present to you, and I'm sorry that we went 5 minutes over.